There are many ways to take apart a Shakespeare speech. This is my way. And to demonstrate it, I've picked a speech relatively at random. This is Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be. That is the question. One of the most famous speeches in English theatre, if not the most famous. And people have been arguing about what this speech means for hundreds of years. We're not going to focus on what it means, but the way that Shakespeare or Hamlet is expressing his thoughts. The first thing I do is count how many lines there are. And I can tell you, because I counted earlier, that right up until loose the name of action is 32 and a half lines. And after that point, soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph in thy horizons, be almost since remember it, Hamlet turns away from what he has been talking about and he starts talking to or about Ophelia. So I'm going to just cross these lines out here. And up until loose the name of action is 32 and a half lines. I'm going to write that at the very top. Now we speak in thoughts, we write in sentences. We speak in thoughts. And thoughts are either statements, questions, or exclamations, marked by a full stop, a question mark, or an exclamation point. So how many thoughts are being expressed in this 32 and a half line speech? Well, I mark the end of a thought by underlining the last three words of the line and then putting a break between the ending thought and the next one. And the first thought ends here. The flesh is heir to. So I'm going to underline the last three words and put a break there. And when you're reading this out loud, this is a useful little device to drive towards the end of that thought and know where you're aiming to. And I love the fact that this thought, in the first Folio version, the original version that it was printed in, ends with a question, because, of course, the speech starts with a question. The next thought, which is a consummation devoutly to be wished. Next thought, must give us pause. Next thought, this is a long one, ends with a bare bodkin. Next thought, fly to others that we know not of. Next thought, the name of action. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 thoughts. Now, just to think about that for a moment, Shakespeare was a really good poet. If he had 6 things to say, he could write it in 6 lines of poetry. There are 32 and a half lines to express these 6 thoughts. So whatever Hamlet is talking about must be really complicated. Now, what type of thoughts are they? Are they statements? Are they questions? Are they exclamations? The first thought is a question. 1 question. 2 questions. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 statements, which is 6 thoughts, so we know that there are 0 exclamation points. We often think of exclamations as being an indication or an offer to shout, whereas they're, in Shakespeare's time, probably more an indication that the character is getting excited. There are thoughts we can see more clearly now because I've underlined the ends of them. All seem to end halfway through the poetic line. And in fact, only 1 thought ends at the end of the poetic line. So we have 5 midline endings. And a midline ending, when the thought ends halfway through a line of poetry, it's like that moment, you know, when someone's talking about something and halfway through what they're saying, they change subjects really quickly, like I just did then. It's a change, a quick turn of thought from one subject to a slightly different subject, or a different part of that subject. 32 lines, 6 things to say, 4 of them are statements. There are 2 questions, but 5 times he changes tack, he almost changes subject. So he's excited about something, exploring a subject or an idea for the first time. Now, what's the idea? Well, in the first folio, which is the copy of Shakespeare edited by two of his actors, they used to capitalize words that they thought were important. And if we look at the capitalized letters, not the ones at the beginning of the speech, because that indicates that the speech is in poetry, we can get the gist of what the speech is about. Because, of course, Shakespeare's actors didn't have much, if any, time to rehearse. They needed to be able to work out what a speech was about quickly. So the next thing I'll do is circle all of the capitalized words in the folio. Question, nobler, slings, arrows, fortune, arms, sea, heartache, natural, flesh, dream, calamity, whips, scorns, oppressors, contumely, love, laws, offers, spurns, quietus, bodkin, fardels, country, born, travellers, travel, puzzles, conscience, cowards, native, resolution, thought, currents, action. The idea is that these are the important words, and why they're important, well, that's homework to do to find out. So the structure of a speech can give us an indication as to how the character is thinking, and the capitalized words can give a sense of what's important to the character in the thoughts they're trying to express. But especially in a speech of this scale, what happens to us after we die? It would be nice to know how the character is feeling. So in order to do that, we have to lift up the hood. And this is a technique taught to me by the actor Emma Pallant, who learned it from Shakespeare's Globe Education in London. And what you do is you write the numbers 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 to the left of the speech above this nice empty white column. And what we do is count the syllables in every line. To be or not to be, that is the question. Because in Shakespeare's time, it wouldn't have been question, but question. That's 12. So I'm going to put an X under 12 next to the first line. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer is 11. X under 11 next to the second line. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, 12. Outrageous rather than outrageous. Or to take arms against a sea of troubles, 11. And by opposing end them to die to sleep. And by opposing end them to die to sleep, 11. No more and by sleep to say we end, 10. The first line of 10 syllables in a speech that should be all 10 syllables. X and a 10 next to that line. The heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks, 11. Now you could probably say natural. It's a perfectly normal pronunciation of the word. I might argue for natural because it's a capitalized word. It's evidently important. It might be nice to sort of spell it out. But we can put a 10/11 question mark here. Talk about it later in class or in rehearsal. For the moment, I'm going to put an X under 11. That flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation, 12. Devoutly to be wished, to die to sleep, 10. To sleep perchance to dream, there's the rub, 10. For in that sleep of death what dreams may come, 10. When we have shuffled off this mortal coil, 10. Must give us pause, there's the respect, 8. So X over here under 8. That makes calamity of so long life, 10. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time? 10. The oppressor's wrong, the poor man's contumely? 11. The pangs of disprized love, the law's delay? 10. The insolence of office and the spurns? 10. That patient merit of the unworthy take? Well, this is an interesting line. That patient merit of the unworthy takes. Patient would be patient. The unworthy would probably be thunworthy. That patient merit of the unworthy takes is 12. I'm going to put 11 or 12 here. Let's say it's a 12 for now. And come back to it in discussion another time. When he himself might his quietus make. 10. With a bare bodkin, who would these fardels bear? To grunt and sweat under a weary life. Let me get that one right. With a bare bodkin, who would these fardels? Yeah. Grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death. 10. The undiscovered country from whose born. 10. No traveller returns puzzles the will. 10. And makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. 10. Thus conscience does make thus conscience does make cowards of us all. Conscience does make cowards of us all. Let's put 10/11 in there. And thus the native hue of resolution. 12. Is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment, with disregard their currents turn away, and loose the name of action soft now. A half line. So you can see from here, a speech that should be written in lines of 10 syllables often is not. And the idea is that if a line has more than 10 syllables, 11 or 12 or 13 or whatever, that the thought that's being expressed is almost too big for the poetic form, that the idea is bursting out of the poetic form. But the prompt was, how does the character feel? And in order to do that, all you need to do is join the X's up. You can see from my very bad art, this is why I did not write this speech out. I got my very trusty cameraman father to do it for me. And when you're finished, you should end up with something that looks a little like this. And then all you need to do is turn the page through, and you can suddenly see the character's heartbeat, like you might see on an ECG reading, where you can see the beep, beep, beep. This is the emotional map of the character. The idea is that when the character is relatively calm, those lines of 10, the heartbeat is normal. And when they say something that really means something to them, their pulse raises to an 11 or a 12, and in some characters even a 13. Hamlet opens with the biggest question. To live or to die, that is the question. It wouldn't make sense to be in a line of 10, it's 12. It gets to a sense of calm, no more, and by a sleep to say we end. And the question then is, why are some lines in 12? What is it about those lines that are important to them? Lists in Shakespeare are so hard to do. We have a long list here. Who would bear the whips and scorns of time? the oppressor's wrong, the poor man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns the patient merit of the unworthy takes. 6 items in the list, and we all have to make them sound different, or at least we have to work out what's important to Hamlet. Without doing this work, you might think that the pangs of disprized love might be important to Hamlet because he's upset over losing the love of Ophelia or missing Ophelia. But if you look at the line, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, it's 10. In this list, the lines that peak to Hamlet are the ones that makes his pulse rise with the oppressor's wrong, the poor man's contumely. And who's the oppressor in Hamlet's life? Claudius. Next one here, with a 12, that patient merit of the unworthy takes. Who's the patient person? Hamlet, who's unworthily taken, in his mind, Claudius. The bit I love most about this speech, because this is the difference between the heartbeat and the heartbreak. We're looking at the things that are making his heart beat faster. What about the things that make his heart break? Well, that's where the line of 8 comes in. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, and we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect. And this is the line of 8, which means that there are 2 syllables missing. There should be 10, there's only 8. And whenever there's less than 10 syllables, Shakespeare's giving the character or the actor an opportunity to pause. Now, they could pause at the beginning of the line. When you've shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause, there's the respect. It could be at the end of the line. When we've shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause, there's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. But seeing as there's a midline ending here, and indeed the word pause, very likely Shakespeare is offering the actor and the character a pause. When we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. And then, having explored this existential theme, he comes to a solid run of 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. It picks up again with the thought of being considered a coward, and at the thought of being resolved and still not acting takes him up to 12 again. His pulse flickers and raises, and then he's interrupted before he quite gets to the end of the idea. The structure giving a sense of how the character is thinking, the capitalized words giving a sense of what ideas are important to them and the thoughts they're expressing, and most important of all, the emotional map to give a sense of their heartbeat and the things that raise their pulse, and the heartbreak, the things that make them pause. And that's how I take apart a Shakespeare speech.